As we all know, we make mistakes. And so this lesson is going to show you how to correct mistakes in incorrect journal entries. Now, there are two ways in which mistakes can be corrected. So if you make a journal entry incorrectly and you have not posted to the ledger yet, okay, so this method can only be done, this first method that we're looking at here, if the entry has not been posted to the ledger, okay, you can use what's called the ruling method. So in the ruling method, you're simply going to draw some lines and then do some initialing. So let's take a look at the first one here. If an entry was made to salary expense instead of rent expense, okay, all you would do is to that original entry, you would draw one single line through salary expense. You don't scribble it, just one line. You write the correct account above it, and then you initial. Okay? Here's a second example. If an entry was for $210 instead of $120. So again, same thing. Single line, no scribbles, no double lines, whatever. Single line. Write the correct amount above, and then initial. Okay, so that's the ruling method. It's the easiest method, keeping in mind that it can only be done if the journal entry has not yet been posted to the ledger. Now, the ruling method is really difficult for us to do without actually having paper and pencil in front of us, so we're not actually going to practice the ruling method, but I just want you to be aware of it, okay? This is the method we're going to use, which is called the correcting entry method. So if the transaction was journalized incorrectly and the amounts were posted, so they were posted to the ledger, you should use the correcting entry method. Okay? The one step is one entry undoes the error and provides the correct account. Every incorrect journal entry can essentially be done in one step. It just takes a little bit of thinking, okay? The two-step is the first step reverses the error, and then the second step is the correct entry, all right? So when you're working on the practice assignment, there's just 4 that you have to do on your own. You're going to have the choice to do one step or 2-step, okay? So if you want to think it through and figure out how to make it a one-stepper, you could do that. Otherwise, you just reverse it and then make the correct entry, okay? So let's take a look at a couple examples. All right, on January 9th, a $620 payment for advertising was incorrectly journalized and posted as a debit to miscellaneous expense for $620 and a credit to cash for $620. Okay, so we're going to do this in one step. All right, so I think it's helpful to see the incorrect entry and then do the correcting entry. So on your notes, you will see that I provided you with the incorrect entry. Okay, but I will write it up here for us. So it was a debit to miscellaneous expense. Okay, yellow's not going to be the best color here, right? All right, it was a debit to miscellaneous expense for $620 and a credit to cash for $620. All right, so looking at this, we know that the cash part is correct, so we just leave that alone, all right? We need to take miscellaneous expense away and replace it with advertising expense. So basically, we are undoing the debit. So to undo the debit of miscellaneous expense, you credit it. That's why it's right here, right? To undo the debit, you credit it. If I draw our little T account, I don't have a lot of room. There's a lot of pictures on this one. Right? It was debited for $620. We want to zero it out, so we'll credit it. And then it zeroes out. Okay? And then we go ahead and we debit advertising expense because that's what should have been debited. We leave cash alone. Cash was correct. Okay? So that's an example of a one step. So what if we wanted to do this in 2 steps? Same thing. On January 9th, the $620 payment for advertising was incorrectly journalized and posted as a debit to miscellaneous expense for $620 and a credit to cash. So again, I'm going to write the entry here for us. So it's miscellaneous expense, debit of $620, credit of cash, $620. So you see the first recording here is we're reversing this entry, okay? So we go ahead and we debit cash $620, which puts the cash back in our account, right? So we're debiting cash $620. And then we credit miscellaneous expense, which gets it off the books, cancels it out. Once we've reversed it, we then go and make the correct entry. And we know the correct entry should have been a debit to advertising expense and a credit to cash. Now, you do have to include descriptions, and you'll notice in your notes, I provided the descriptions for you. So, the first description was to reverse our incorrect entry, and the second was to correct the entry of January 9th, in which a payment for advertising expense was debited to miscellaneous expense. Do you need to have descriptions that are that descriptive? No. You'll see mine are not. Okay? You just have to give some kind of description of what's going on. All right. So actually, those that I just went over, see, you know that I make lots of errors. So that would be why this is probably my favorite lesson. Were just examples. Okay, here's examples that you weren't writing down. I don't know, I'd have to look at my notes, but you have your notes open, so you're following along, so you should be fine, okay? So example 1, which is really example 2. On July 9th, a $380 payment for supplies was recorded in the General Journal as a debit to supplies expense for $380 and a credit to cash. Okay, so we know when we buy supplies, we're acquiring an asset, and therefore it should not go to the expense account. Okay, so let me say that again. When we buy supplies, we're acquiring an asset, so it should not go to the expense account. So if I zoom in for you here, we have our original entry, which I recorded for you. And then if you were choosing to do it in 1 step, okay, we know that the second part of the entry is correct, so we leave that alone. It's the first part, which is the supplies expense, that's incorrect. So that's a debit. To get it off the books, to reverse it, we're going to credit it, right? And then we go ahead and record the correct debit, which is to supplies. The 1-step entry works great if only one account was incorrect, or if the amount was incorrect. That's when the 1-step entry works well. If both accounts in the journal entry are incorrect, it's very difficult to do it in 1 step. Okay? All right, now here's what the 2-step would look like. We will take the cash and supplies expense and reverse them, right? So the first entry is reversing. And the second entry is the recording of the correct entry. Okay. On December 17th, the receivable was collected from a customer in the amount of $1,650. The accountant recorded it in the General Journal as a debit to accounts receivable and a credit to cash in the amount of $1,560. Okay? So the amount that was recorded is incorrect. All right? We actually recorded less than we should have. So the original entry is a debit to accounts receivable, $1,560, credit to cash. But if we take $1,650 and subtract $1,560, which is what we actually recorded from it, we see that we shorted both accounts $90. So the correcting entry is just going to be an additional entry where we're going to additionally debit accounts receivable 90 and additionally credit cash 90. Okay, so that's a one step when the amount is incorrect. You see how nicely that works? I'm not even having you do this as a two-step. Okay. Now, if we had overstated it, right? Let's say instead of 1650, we recorded 1750. That's $1,000 difference. Overstated, your entry would actually be a reverse of this. So it would be a debit of 1,000, and accounts receivable, a credit of 1,000, because you actually have to take that off the books. That's if it's an overstatement. So if it's an overstatement, you have to reverse something. If it's an understatement, you just add to it. On August 13th, the purchase of $36,000 in insurance was recorded as a debit to prepaid insurance and a credit to insurance expense in the amount of $36,000. Record the correcting entry. All right, so we know that when we purchase insurance, prepaid insurance, we are paying cash, and it's not an expense. We are just acquiring the insurance, okay? So here's our original entry of a debit to prepaid insurance and a credit to insurance expense. And then to correct it, we are going to reverse it. Here's our reverse. And then record the correct entry. We got insurance, we paid cash, so it should be a credit to cash. All right, and our final example. On January 25th, the purchase of delivery equipment on account in the amount of $5,000 was recorded as a debit to office equipment and a credit to accounts payable. So for this example, we just debited the wrong account, all right? So here's the original entry. It's a debit to office equipment and a credit to accounts payable. The accounts payable is correct. We're going to leave that alone. So to do it in one step, we're going to take a debit to delivery equipment and then a credit to office equipment. That gets it off the books. And that's correcting entries.